The morning I finally understood what my life had become, I was sitting on a folded piece of cardboard outside a coffee shop in downtown Cincinnati, holding a paper cup with 40 cents in it, and a silver Mercedes slowed at the light 3 feet from my knees. I knew that car. I had ridden in that car. My daughter Caroline was behind the wheel. Sunglasses on, phone against her cheek, laughing at something. She looked right through the glass. Right through me, the way you look through a lamppost. Then the light turned green. And she was gone, and I sat there in the cold with my own name stuck in my throat like a bone. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. Most people who loved me called me Ellie. And I want to tell you exactly how I got from a paid-off house on Sycamore Street to a square of cardboard on a sidewalk. Because if I only told you the ending, you would think I must have done something terrible to deserve it. I didn't. What I did was love 3 children with everything I had. And then trust the 2 who wore the nicest clothes. Let me take you back. Because you cannot understand the fall unless you first see how high I thought I was standing. I grew up in Ridgeway, Ohio, a small town about 40 minutes north of Dayton. The kind of place where everyone knew whose truck was whose and the diner still wrote the specials on a chalkboard. I married Tom Whitfield when I was 22. Tom ran a machine at a tool and die shop. And for 30 years he came home with metal shavings in the cuffs of his jeans and a smell of oil on his hands that no soap ever fully took away. We were not rich. We were the opposite of rich. But we were careful. And we were stubborn, and by the time our first child came we had already put a down payment on a small blue house with a sycamore tree in the front yard that gave the street its name. We had 3 children. Caroline first, then Bradley 2 years later. Then a long gap, and then Daniel, who we called Danny. Our surprise, born when I was 36 and had already given away the crib. I want you to hear what those years cost me, not because I want a medal, but because it matters for what comes later. When Caroline showed she was smart. Really smart, the kind of smart that skips grades and corrects the teacher. Tom and I made a decision. We would pour everything into these children. So I took a second job. For 11 years I cleaned offices at night after cleaning my own house all day. I would leave at 6 in the evening with a thermos of coffee and come home at midnight with my knees aching. And I did it so Caroline could go to the private school 2 towns over. And later so she could go to law school without drowning in debt. Tom picked up every overtime shift the shop offered until his hands shook. We ate a lot of beans in those years. I patched the same winter coat 3 times so the money could go to a laptop, a tutor, an application fee. Bradley was different, charming instead of brilliant. The kind of boy who could talk a teacher out of a detention. He wanted business. We funded his degree too, and then when he wanted to move to Dallas to get into commercial real estate, Tom cashed in a small retirement account, $40,000, to give Brad his start. Tom told me, "A father plants trees he will not sit under." I have thought about that sentence 1,000 times since. And then there was Danny. By the time Danny came along, we were tired. I will admit that. I was tired in my bones, and I had less to give him. Less money, less energy, less of the fierce ambition I had spent on the older 2. Danny was not a scholar. He struggled with reading. He would rather be in the garage with Tom, taking apart a lawnmower, than at a desk. And I remember, God forgive me, feeling something close to disappointment when he told me at 17 that he did not want college. That he wanted to work with his hands like his dad. I said, "Danny, I did not clean offices for 11 years so you could dig ditches." And he looked at me, this gentle boy, and he said, "Mom, I am not you, and I am not Caroline. I just want to build things that last." I let it go, but I carried a quiet shame that my youngest was going to be the one who did not amount to much. Understand that. hold on to it. Because I had the value of my 3 children ranked in my heart long before any of them ever did a thing to me. I decided, without meaning to, that the 2 who chased money were the successes. And the one who chased purpose was the disappointment. That was my first betrayal. It was of Danny, and it was mine. Tom died the spring Danny turned 26. A heart attack at the shop, on a Tuesday, with a sandwich still in his lunchbox. He was gone before the ambulance reached the highway. And in one afternoon, the woman who had spent 40 years being half of a careful, stubborn couple became a 60-year-old widow alone in a paid-off house, with a life insurance check she did not know how to think about, and 3 grown children who lived their lives in 3 different cities. The house was mine, free and clear. Tom had made sure of that. There was $240,000 in life insurance. There were savings, close to $90,000, that we had scraped together over decades. There was a small pension. By the standards of Sycamore Street, I was a wealthy widow. I did not feel wealthy. I felt like a woman standing in a kitchen listening for footsteps that were never coming home. Caroline came to the funeral in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly bills. Flew in from Chicago where she had made partner at a firm whose name I could never remember. Bradley came from Dallas in a rental car nicer than any car we had ever owned. Talking on the phone in the parking lot of the funeral home about a deal that could not wait even for his father's burial. And Danny, my Danny, drove over from the job site in his work truck, still in his boots, and he was the one who held me up at the grave when my legs gave out. He was the one who slept on my couch for 2 weeks after. Who fixed the gutter, who sat with me at 2 in the morning when I could not stop crying. But in my grief-fogged mind, I still filed that under. Well, that is because Danny does not have anywhere important to be. The trouble started quietly, the way real trouble always does. About 4 months after the funeral, Caroline called me and said, "Mom, we need to talk about your affairs. Not your feelings, your affairs." She said with Dad gone, I was vulnerable. She used that word, vulnerable, in her clean lawyer voice. She said there were people who prey on widows. And there were taxes, and there was something called probate that would eat my estate alive if anything happened to me. And did I really want the government and a nursing home to take everything Dad worked for? I did not want that. Of course I did not want that. So I listened. Caroline said the smart thing to do, the thing she recommended to all her wealthy clients, was to put my assets into a living trust. She would draw it up herself. No charge, because I was her mother. The house, the savings, the insurance money, all of it would go into the Whitfield family trust. And to make it work, she explained, someone responsible needed to have power of attorney. So that if I ever got sick or confused, the family could manage things without a court freezing everything. That someone should be her, because she was the lawyer, and Bradley, because he understood investments. 2 of them, together, so nobody could ever accuse anybody of anything. It sounded, honestly, like the most careful, loving thing in the world. Here is the first warning sign I ignored. When Danny found out, he drove over that same night. He sat at my kitchen table with the trust papers spread out. This construction worker who barely finished high school, running his rough finger down the pages very slowly, sounding out the legal words. And he said, "Mom, why is it only Caroline and Brad on this? Why not all 3 of us? Or why not a lawyer who does not stand to inherit anything?" And I laughed at him. I actually laughed. I said, "Danny, Caroline is a lawyer, this is what she does all day. You would not understand it." And he got quiet, and he stacked the papers up neat. And he said, "Okay, Mom. I just do not like that you would not be the one in control anymore." And then he said the thing I would remember on that cold sidewalk 2 years later. He said, if it ever goes wrong, I am still here. He did not say I told you so. He just said, I am still here. I signed everything. I signed the house I had lived in for 37 years into a trust one would not control. I signed away power of attorney to 2 children who lived 1,000 miles away. I did it with a cheap pen at my own kitchen table. And I felt proud that I was being so responsible. For a while, nothing seemed wrong. That is how these things work. The first year, Bradley called me once a month with updates, using words like diversified and municipal and yield. And he told me my money was doing wonderfully. He said the trust had grown. He said I did not have to worry about a thing. And I did not, because worrying is exhausting when you are grieving. And it was such a relief to hand it to someone else. The second warning sign came the following winter. My furnace died. 40-year-old furnace, finally quit in January, and the quote to replace it was $6,000. Now, this was my money. I had $90,000 of savings that I had put into that trust. So I called Bradley and asked him to send me the money for a furnace. And there was a pause on the phone. A long one. And Brad said, Mom, it is not that simple, the funds are invested. We cannot just pull them out without penalties, let me look into it. It took 11 days. 11 days in an Ohio January, and I ran space heaters and slept in 3 sweaters. And finally a check came, and Bradley made me feel like I had been unreasonable for asking for my own money. I told Caroline about it, thinking she would be on my side. And Caroline said, Mom, Brad is protecting you from yourself, if we let you dip into the principal every time something breaks. There will be nothing left when you really need it. Do you want to end up a burden? That word, burden. It landed somewhere deep in me and stayed. I did not want to be a burden. So I stopped asking questions. Do you see how they did it? They did not steal from me with a gun. They made me ashamed to ask. The third warning sign, I only understood later. That spring, Danny got engaged to a woman named Maria, a nurse he met when his crew was renovating a wing of the hospital. Sweet, sharp, kind, the kind of woman who looks you in the eye. And at the small engagement dinner, Caroline made a comment. She said, Well, Danny, at least Maria has a real job, one of you should have health insurance. She laughed like it was a joke. Everyone laughed except Maria. Who did not, and Danny, who did not. And I laughed. God help me, I laughed at my own son at his engagement dinner. Because I still had that ranking in my heart, the successes and the disappointment. Maria pulled me aside in the kitchen that night, drying dishes. And she said something I did not want to hear. She said, Mrs. Whitfield, can I ask you something? Do you actually see any statements for your money? Do you get anything in the mail, or does it all go to Caroline and Brad? And I said, that is not really your business, dear, in a cold voice I am ashamed of now. And Maria nodded and said, You are right, I am sorry. But then she said, in my job I see a lot of families at the end. And it is almost never the rich-looking ones who show up at 3 in the morning. Remember that. I did not want to remember that. I thought she was jealous. The real unraveling started about 18 months after Tom died, and it started with a phone call I was not supposed to hear. I had gone to Chicago to visit Caroline, my first visit to her beautiful condo on the 31st floor with a view of the lake. I was so proud to be there, my daughter's mother, in this palace. I got up in the night for a glass of water. And I heard Caroline in her office, on the phone, and her voice was not the smooth lawyer voice. It was tight and angry. And I heard her say, I told you not to move that much at once. Brad, if the trustee has to answer for it, it is my license on the line. Not yours. And then she said, she is not going to notice. She does not even read the statements, just do not do it again until this closes. And then she said the sentence that turned my blood to ice water in that dark hallway. She said, look, when she goes into a home, none of this matters anyway. The house sale covers it. When she goes into a home. She was talking about me. She was talking about my house. I did not confront her. I was too scared, and too confused. And a part of me still could not believe it. I flew home to Ohio the next day. And I started, for the first time in 18 months, to actually pay attention. I asked Bradley to send me a full statement of the trust. He said he would. He did not. I asked again. He said the accountant was busy. I asked a third time, and Caroline called me and asked why I was harassing her brother. And did I not trust my own children, after everything they had done for me? That was when I did the thing they never expected the tired, grieving widow to do. I drove to the county recorder's office in Ridgeway. And I asked a very patient young man to pull the records on my own house. And I sat down in a plastic chair, and I read that the house on Sycamore Street. The house Tom and I bought when I was 22. The house our children grew up in, had been sold 14 months earlier. Sold. For $210,000. To a rental company. I had been living in my own home paying what I thought was maintenance to the trust. And it had not been my home for over a year. My children had sold the house out from under me and had me paying rent to strangers without ever telling me. I want to describe to you what that does to a person. It is not just money. It is the ground opening under your feet. Every memory in that house, Tom teaching Danny to ride a bike in the driveway. Caroline's graduation party in the backyard, 40 years of Christmases, and it had been quietly liquidated by the 2 children I had bled myself dry to raise. While they told me they were protecting me, I called Danny. I did not call Caroline or Brad. I called my construction worker son. The disappointment, and I could barely speak, and he said, Mom. Do not do anything, do not sign anything, I am coming. And he drove 4 hours that night straight from a job site. Danny is the one who took me to a lawyer. Not Caroline. Obviously. A woman named Ruth Alvarez, an elder law attorney 2 counties over. Gray-haired, quiet, the kind of person who listens for a long time before she says anything. And when Ruth finished going through what documents we could get, she took off her glasses and she rubbed her eyes and she said, Mrs. Whitfield, I am going to be honest with you, because you deserve honesty. And she laid it out. Bradley's real estate business in Dallas had been collapsing for 2 years. Overleveraged, she called it. He had been quietly draining the trust to cover his own losses. Moving my money into his failing deals, hoping to make it back before anyone noticed. Caroline, as co-trustee and the lawyer who wrote the trust, had either helped him or looked the other way, because if it all came out, she was the one who would answer to the state bar. The house had been sold to raise cash. The insurance money was mostly gone. The savings were gone. Of the nearly $400,000 I came into after Tom died, there was, at that moment, a little under $19,000 left. And Bradley was reaching for that too. And here is the cruelest part. Because I had signed power of attorney and put everything in the trust. They had done most of it legally, or at least legally enough that untangling it would take years and cost more than I had left. Ruth said we could file suit. We could report Caroline to the bar. We might, eventually, recover something. But it would be a long, brutal fight against a lawyer daughter who knew every trick, and I was 62 years old with $19,000 to my name. I decided to fight anyway. Not for revenge. I want to be clear about that. Because I know you are waiting for the part where I destroy them. That is not this story. I decided to fight because I could not live in a world where you can do this to your mother and simply keep the money. When Caroline found out I had hired a lawyer, the mask came all the way off. She called me, and she was not tight or angry anymore. She was cold, and that was worse. She said, "Mother, if you pursue this, you will lose, and you will lose alone, and you will have publicly humiliated your family for nothing." She said, "Bradley made some mistakes, but he is your son. And you are trying to send him to prison." She said, "If you do this, you are no longer my mother, and you will not see your grandchildren again. And I will make sure Bradley feels the same." She was disowning me for catching her. And then she said the thing that put me on the sidewalk. She said, "And by the way, the lease on the house is up in 60 days. And the trust will not be renewing it. Meaning, get out. Get out of the house you thought you owned." I had nowhere to go. And $19,000 that was tangled up in a legal fight. And 2 of my 3 children had just cut me off entirely. I made a decision then that I am not proud of. But I understand why I made it. I was so ashamed. Ashamed that I had let this happen, ashamed of what my family had become. Ashamed to be a 62-year-old widow with nothing. And Danny had just had a baby with Maria, a little girl named Sophie. And they were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, and Danny's construction work had slowed for the winter. I would not, be a burden on the one child who had never let me down. So when Danny offered me his couch, I lied. I told him I had it handled. I told him I was staying with a friend from church in Cincinnati while the lease ran out. I told him I had some money set aside he did not know about. I told my good son a stack of lies so that I would not be a weight on him. And I moved to Cincinnati where nobody knew me, and I told myself I would figure it out. I did not figure it out. $19,000 goes fast when there is a lawyer and a cheap motel and no income and a body that is 62 years old. The legal fight ground on slowly. Ruth was good, but Caroline stalled everything. Months passed. The money ran out. The motel became a cheaper motel. And then the cheaper motel became a night bus, and then one morning I was sitting on a piece of cardboard outside a coffee shop with a paper cup. Because I had learned that if you sit near where the nice people get their lattes, sometimes they drop $1 in your cup on their way to being important. And that dollar was breakfast. That is where this story started. Caroline's silver Mercedes at the red light. My own daughter looking through me like glass. She did not know I was homeless. She thought I was at a church friend's house. Because that is what the family group text said, the one I was no longer on. She had no idea her mother was 30 feet away begging. And she would not have stopped if she had. I was on that sidewalk for 19 days. I know because I counted them. 19 days of a kind of cold that gets into your spine. Of being invisible, of watching people teach their children not to look at me. 19 days of understanding, finally and completely, exactly what I was worth to the 2 children I had ranked as my successes. Nothing. I was worth nothing to them the moment I stopped being useful and started being a problem. On the 19th day, everything changed, and it changed because of the child I had been ashamed of. Danny had gotten suspicious. The church friend I claimed to be staying with did not exist. And eventually Danny called every Whitfield he could find and every church in Cincinnati. And one pastor remembered a proud gray-haired woman who had come in once for a hot meal and refused to give her name and would not stay. And Danny, my Danny, took 3 days off work he could not afford. And he drove up and down the streets of downtown Cincinnati in his work truck with a photo of me on his phone, showing it to every homeless person and shelter worker and coffee shop cashier he could find. For 3 days. And on the third day, he found me. I was on my cardboard, and I heard a truck door. And I heard boots on the sidewalk, those work boots I knew the sound of. And I looked up, and there was my son, and his face just broke. He got down on his knees on that filthy sidewalk in his work clothes. And he took my cold hands, and he said, "Mom." He said, "Mom, what did you do? Why did you lie to me?" And I could not answer, I just cried, and he pulled me into his chest right there on the sidewalk and he held me while I shook. And he kept saying, "I have got you, I have got you. I am not going anywhere." He did not lecture me. He did not say "I told you so." Though God knows he had earned the right, all the way back to that kitchen table 2 years before. He just picked up my one bag, and he helped me into his truck. And he turned the heat all the way up, and he drove me home. To his home. To the little 2-bedroom apartment where Maria was waiting with soup already on the stove. Because he had called ahead to say he found me. I need to tell you what those people did for me. Because it is the opposite of everything else in this story. Danny and Maria gave me their bedroom. Their own bedroom. They moved themselves and the baby into the small second room and put me in the big one. And they would not hear a word against it. Maria, the nurse. The daughter-in-law I had been cold to in her own kitchen. Got me to a doctor, got my blood pressure under control. Got me eating again, sat with me at night when the shame kept me awake. And little Sophie, that baby, would crawl across the floor to me and pull herself up on my knees and grin at me with 2 teeth. And I swear that child put me back together more than any doctor. They had almost nothing. Danny made maybe $50,000 in a good year. And construction is not a good year every year. But what they had, they gave me completely, without keeping score, without ever once making me feel like the burden Caroline had trained me to be so afraid of becoming. And here is where the story turns, and where I want you to pay attention. Because the ending is not what you think. Once I was safe. Once I was warm and fed and not sleeping on the street. Something in me came back. The fight came back. I went back to Ruth Alvarez. And I said, "I want to keep going, but I have no money." And Ruth, this quiet gray-haired woman, said something I will never forget. She said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I did not become an elder law attorney to help rich people avoid taxes. I did it because of women exactly like you. We are going to finish this. And you are going to pay me out of whatever we recover. And if we recover nothing, you owe me nothing." It took another 14 months. I will not pretend it was fast or clean. But here is what happened. And it is important that it is realistic, because I am not going to lie to you and tell you I got rich and they went to prison and I danced on their financial graves. That is not how the real world works. Bradley's real estate deals had already collapsed on their own. That was not my doing. It was his. The market turned. The leverage caught up with him, and by the time our case matured, Bradley was bankrupt, genuinely bankrupt. The money he stole from me lost inside deals that lost everyone else's money too. There was not a pot of gold to recover. You cannot squeeze water from a stone. And my son had turned my life savings into a stone. But Caroline was a different matter. Caroline had a law license. And a law license is a thing you can lose. Ruth filed a complaint with the state bar detailing exactly how Caroline had drafted a trust that benefited herself and her brother, served as trustee, breached her fiduciary duty, and allowed the systematic looting of a vulnerable client who happened to be her own mother. And that, it turned out, was not something the bar looked away from. Caroline did not go to prison. But she was suspended, and the suspension became a matter of public record. And at a firm like hers, a public suspension for defrauding your own elderly mother is not something you come back from. She lost her partnership. She lost the 31st floor condo with the view of the lake. She lost the career I had cleaned offices for 11 years to buy her. I want to be honest about how that felt, because you might expect triumph. And it was not triumph. When I heard, I sat in Danny's kitchen and I cried. And not from joy. I cried because I remembered a little girl in a private school uniform that I had scrubbed floors to pay for. And I thought about how far that little girl had traveled to become a woman who could look at her homeless mother through a car window and feel nothing. There is no victory in that. There is only grief. We did recover something. Not the house, that was gone. Not most of the money. That was gone with Bradley. But in the settlement, we recovered about $70,000. Mostly from what could be clawed back and from Caroline's professional insurance. After Ruth's fees, I had a little under $50,000 to my name. Not the $400,000 I started with. But not nothing. Not cardboard on a sidewalk. And I did something with that money that surprised even me. Danny and Maria had been saving for years to buy a small house. To get Sophie out of that 2-bedroom apartment. And I took my $50,000. And I gave it to them as the down payment, and I would not hear a word against it. Danny protested. He said, "Mom, that is your security, you cannot." And I said, "Danny, I finally understand something it took me 63 years to learn. Security is not a number in a trust. Security is who shows up when you are on the sidewalk. You are my security. Let me put my money where my safety actually is." We bought a house together. A small brick house with a yard. And Danny built me a room on the back, built it with his own hands. Those hands I had once been ashamed of, those hands that build things that last. And I live there now, with my son and my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter. And a second grandchild on the way. I babysit. I cook. I am not a burden. I am a grandmother, which is the only title I ever really wanted. I have not spoken to Caroline or Bradley in over 2 years. Caroline sent one letter, after her suspension, and it was not an apology. It was 3 pages explaining how everything was actually my fault for being difficult. And how I had ruined the family, and I read it once and I did not read it again. Bradley disappeared into his bankruptcy and his shame, and I hear he is somewhere in Texas rebuilding. And I hope he does rebuild, because he is still my son. And a mother's love does not have a shut-off valve even when it should. I forgive them, mostly, not because they deserve it, but because carrying that much anger at 65 is too heavy. And I do not have the strength to spare. But forgiveness is not the same as trust. And I will never again mistake one for the other. Here is the lesson I paid $400,000 and 19 days on a sidewalk to learn. And I am giving it to you for free, so please take it. I spent my whole life measuring my children by the wrong ruler. I decided that the ones who chased money and status were my successes. And the one who chased purpose and stayed close was my disappointment. And I organized my entire life, my sacrifices, my pride, and eventually my trust, around that ranking. I gave my power to the 2 who dressed like success. And I overlooked the one who actually loved me, because love and work boots did not look impressive enough to me. I almost died on a sidewalk because I could not tell the difference between a child who was successful and a child who was good. They are not the same thing. They were never the same thing. And the world will try very hard to convince you that they are. That the child with the corner office loves you more than the child with dirt under her nails. That money is proof of worth, that the ones who fly first class are the ones who will catch you when you fall. It is a lie. Watch who shows up. Watch who is still there at 3 in the morning. Like Maria the nurse told me in a kitchen while I was too proud to listen. That is your family. That is your security. Everything else is just a nice car at a red light. Driving away. So let me leave you with one question, and I truly want to know your answer. Because I think about it every single day. If your life fell apart tomorrow, and you were sitting on a sidewalk with a paper cup, which of the people in your life would actually stop the car? And more important than that, have you been telling that person, with your time and your trust and your love, that you know it is them? Tell me in the comments. I will be reading every single one.